So I think we gotten to the part we were talking about the devaluing of human life. When you devalue God, you devalue human life. Talked about Hitler exterminating millions of Jews and others, communism. I think we've gotten to that part. Underlying view of man. That's where we are. We gotten to this because I remember we saw this. So we talked about the fact that when you view man as just the product of evolution, then obviously you're not going to think much of him. He's just another piece of meat, animated meat, basically. We talked about all these quotes from famous thinkers like Nietzsche and Kipling and Gould, Thornberry, Schoenberg. Kipling, I guess, is that Rudyard Kipling? I mean, I guess he's the one that wrote Watership Down. I never pegged him as some kind of devout evolutionist, but we've been compared by evolutionists to a mere insect, a fungus on the surface of one of the minor planets. Now isn't that interesting? I'll just make an aside. So, when I think about it, you look at the universe. It's incomprehensible to the human mind. I mean, perhaps second only to God. It's kind of akin to imagining, God. It's incomprehensible to the human mind, and so of course, that's when we personify him into just a man like George Burns. You remember those stupid movies back in the 70s? Yeah. I watched them all the time growing up. My parents they thought that was the stuff back then, just misguided. But you think about the universe and how gigantic it is, and you think about how small we are in comparison. You ever seen those videos where they start with somebody or something, and then they just start zooming out, and you're like, it makes you feel, on the one hand, insignificant, but then you think about the fact that God created all of everything, and He created us. So we're His special creation. We are the thing that we're kind of the crux, the apex of the things that He created. I mean, we're the last thing, right? God created man. Yeah, that's true. That's true. So that's a good point. So, you know, he created the earth for us and also the universe, even though we can't necessarily go to other planets yet. I mean, we've been to the moon, but why is there all of this? It doesn't. It just God just created it. I mean, just that massive amount of power just created it for us to enjoy.
Years ago, Dr. Michael Denton cited some material from an astrophysicist. These studies are supposed to be well documented and based on calculations, but they estimated the amount of matter in the visible universe and the location, relative location of that matter, how many light years away from this galaxy and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And they crunched all the numbers and they came back and they said that actually, even in the most distant, unimaginably distant galaxies that are just tiny specks that we haven't even seen until maybe Hubble,
Yeah.
that even there are influences that can be measured upon our bodies at the moment from those seemingly obscure galaxies. Of course, all of them combined do as well. So he said, even the way we quantify gravitational fields on the Earth has to do with what's happening way out there, millions of light years from Earth. And I thought that's an interesting take on things. I figured.
Well, I mean, there's light that comes from these stars that hit the Earth. Obviously they're hitting our eyes, so they're hitting the Earth, and the gravitational waves, the gravitational forces. I mean, even though they're a long distance away, it's a non-zero effect on the Earth. So yeah, all these things come together.
And I think his point about that, what reminded me of it was that obviously it appears that the universe
Hmm.
that conditions on the earth are absolutely optimum for life as we know it because of things like that that our forefathers never would have guessed.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. So when you think of those kind in those kind of terms, you think, you know, all of this was it was created for us for our benefit, which is the exact opposite of this. You know, a fungus on the surface of the minor planet. Like we're
There's
just a
even
disease.
there's even more than it, as spectacular and unfathomable as that is. Christ was also given to us, and that's even more spectacular.
That's true. So on top of all of the worldly things, the world, the mundane things, the most valuable and spectacular gift of all was, of course, Jesus and God's grace toward us. So anyway, they're just, and it goes to the attitude of gratitude. I'm sorry that rhymed, but if you think like this guy, Du Maurier, which stupid Frenchman, probably that's the reason. But anyway, or Germans are like just as bad, but a fungus on the surface. I mean, that's almost you're almost ungrateful. We're just useless. We're a useless byproduct, and it's almost being mad at even existing. So that's the complete opposite of a Christian who should have the attitude of, wow, think about what I have been given, you know, of all of the innumerable children, individuals that have never been born. We have been given this and we have a shot at eternal life. Think about that. I mean, you forget about the Powerball lottery. That's that's the prize right there. That's the most important prize. So why are we not, you know, if you thought, and I don't mean to compare it to a lottery, but there are people out there they'll buy 100 tickets if they know, oh, look at this big $20 billion or whatever prize. They'll go out there and they'll do anything they can to get that prize, to have just a shot at it. Not that they're going to get it, but they just want to maximize their ability to get it. So why are people doing that for money, which ultimately is nothing? It gives you some comfort here in this very brief existence we have. And yet they don't think twice about the eternal life. And you have a guarantee there. You don't have to buy 100 lottery tickets randomly, just hoping that maybe one of them is it. No, you can have it. It's there. And you can know it. And it's free on top of all of that. It's just crazy to me that people would, they have this kind of attitude about their life. They're just mad at their existence. And if I just had some money, I'd be happy. But that's not true. Money doesn't buy happiness. That's, again, there's a reason people say that. It's not something that the rich people came up with to hold poor people down. It's true. Anyway, so we have all these quotes from people that are very, very unhappy because they're atheists and they have a void in their life that they can't fill with money or their vain, empty philosophy, right? So this is what man is, then next to nothing at all, yet this is what students are being indoctrinated with from kindergarten all the way through graduate school. I don't remember if I mentioned this. One of our Supreme Court justices, and by no means the only one, Oliver Wendell Holmes, said, I see no reason for attributing to man a significant difference in kind from that which belongs to a grain of sand.
And that affected his jurisprudence, if you could call it that.
It had to.
Because many of the statements he made about, well, he said, for example, law is whatever you can predict a judge is going to rule. However predict. What is just is whatever you can get by with. I mean, it's very relativistic. And they say he absolutely revolutionized our law schools to the detriment of our nation. We're still suffering from Oliver Wendell Holmes III. He was a bane on our society.
Mm-hmm.
It's too bad that man was ever born. I hate to say that. It's really bad that he was.
Yeah. Well, and it's sad that people listen to him. But this again, there's an appetite for that kind of teaching and preaching, unfortunately, in society. But imagine that, you have no more rights than a grain of sand, basically. You don't. You have no more rights. Animals, you don't have any more rights than that cockroach. You know.
Well, given evolution, that's a logical conclusion.
So when you step on a cockroach, I mean, maybe we should arrest you and bring you up on murder charges. Um, is this it would be humorous if it weren't something that we actually deal with, and we are dealing with the repercussions of it today. So, crimes against humanity. And here's an AI picture. I just said, show me an urchin in a war torn country, basically. It seems sad enough. Probably a little
I'm glad you
Ukrainian
didn't get
boy.
seafood when you put that in.
What's that?
I'm glad you didn't have a clump of seafood.
Oh, really?
When you said show me an urchin.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I see your
An urchin with a tattered shirt on. So now we get to the next section, crimes against humanity. So once the evolutionary view of man was applied, appalling crimes against humanity began to be committed. The worst crimes were committed by the communists who felt they could build heaven on earth. Well, they had to, because there is no heaven beyond this one, so we got to make it here. Marx predicted that when the workers had their revolution, then government would wither away since it was no longer necessary. The proletariat would essentially be living in harmony. We know how that works, right? That's
Do you think he really believed that, or is this just a means to an end?
I think he was like any of these other guys. I think he was just out to make his mark, no pun intended. But he was just a loser, man, and this gave him something that he could be rich and famous with. Um, Again, there are a lot of people that they think that when the revolution comes, and social media is filled with these kind of people. They think that when the revolution comes, they're going to be just living an easy life instead of out there digging potatoes up out of the ground. But a lot of these people will be the first ones up against the wall, at least in traditional communist societies, because they have the rainbow hair and pronouns in their bio kind of stuff. And the communists don't brook that. I mean, China is a great example of that. They don't play games over there. Like you're either putting together an iPhone or you're digging up, potatoes or whatever they have that they can grow in the bad soil over there. Or you're, high-ranking member of the Communist Party, but that's few and far between. But that's it. There's nothing else. And if they can't use you and the sweat of your brow to help enrich the party loyalists, then they'll just sedate you, rip out your organs, sell them for money on the black market. I mean, that's all you are. You are cattle. You're literally cattle to an atheist, to a communist. Which again, I've just crimes against humanity. I've kind of brushed on a couple of those here. So we'll all be living in harmony in a communist utopia. But as Paul Johnson says, the experience of the 20th century shows emphatically that utopianism is never far from gangsterism. And that's true. I mean, you think about Che Guevara, you think about those kind of absolute. This is one of the saddest videos I saw. Is somebody I guess they were Cuban, and they must be from Cuba, or maybe they immigrated, but they were talking about how, Americans just, they wear Che Guevara shirts and they're all enamored with this.
Idiots, dude.
They are. They're these
Absolute idiots.
they are. And, the narrator was saying that, we used to have all these wonderful things. People used to come and vacation, people come for our beautiful hotels, state-of-the-art, facilities. But then after that happened, that was all over with. Now they live in poverty. They got, still cars from the 50s that they keep running. It's sad, but that is the end result of communism. And of course, Castro, he couldn't keep Cuba running without help from other communist nations like Russia. And so, of course, they want, China, they want to put their missiles there in Cuba. You remember that fiasco. So Again, it is a, I don't even know if it's a Ponzi scheme. It's just, it's a racket. It's a gangsterism, as he says, that devalues human life. Human beings are absolutely have zero value other than the work and the sweat of their brow that they can produce.
In the abstraction, they claim humanity has value, but no individual cog in the great
Hmm.
machine has value.
Yeah, this collectivism idea
There's
that
no such thing as humanity. That is nothing but an abstraction. It's
it,
just a group of people,
yeah, it's just a
most
clump
of
of
whom are
people.
mistreated.
Yeah. So, it's at its core, it's just very wrong. And no matter how much you try and, clump it together and pack it in so that it hears, it has a rotten core, and it is corrupt from the middle. It's kind of like, I love that analogy. I love that, or that, well, I guess it was kind of an analogy where they were talking about the U.S. aid, remember? And Elon says, um, it's not just an apple that has some worms in it. It's nothing but worms. I mean, I thought that's all. It's all worms. I love that. Uh, it's an apple made of worms, and there's no apple left. Anyway, it's a great visual. Since the beginning of communism, human life has been cheap. Like the Jews in Nazi Germany, tens of millions of farmers were taken and shipped all over Russia, thousands of miles on long trains of boxcars jammed full of people without food and without the opportunity to get out of the boxcars for as long as 5, 15, or 20 days. Many of them died. The rest were spread all over the country. They separated them, changed them, and did everything to them. 10 million people were killed to bring about collectivization in the Soviet Union. 10 million people. And you remember that, when they would have starvation in the cities, they would just take everything away from the farmers out that were actually growing the food. They would just take it all so they could feed the people there in the urban centers. And they would let them starve, the people that were actually growing the food. So it's a very unfair system. I mean, and the irony is they say, "Oh, it's the most fair," and it's like, no, it's pretty much the most unfair because you're taking from people that produce and giving to the people that don't.
Remind you of a question. Was the first lemming that went over the cliff smarter than those behind him?
Yeah.
Or those behind him smarter than he was? No, they were all dumb.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
thought he was the leader.
That's a good point. And it kind of reminds me when you speak of lemmings, these kids today that worship Che Guevara, they think communism's the answer because they just don't want to go out and get a job.
They've been told that by their
Yeah,
colleagues.
that's true too. Um, you know, it's never worked anywhere communism has been tried. It has never worked. But somehow they're going to be the ones that make it work. Oh, okay, yeah, it worked. It didn't work the last 100 times. That's the definition of insanity. Some people say is to do the same thing over and over and over and to expect a different outcome eventually.
The definition of arrogance is to say we're the only ones that can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else failed.
Yeah, again, it's chronological snobbery, in a sense. Well, they didn't have the technology. Well, why do we have the technology? It's not because of communism. It's despite communism is the sinkhole where any kind of technology goes to die. Look at Cuba. China might be an exception. Russia, they're struggling.
The thing about China is while they're authoritarian and they're nominally communists, they're pragmatic enough to know their system wouldn't work. It was not working, so they adopted ours
Mm-hmm.
temporarily. It's a hybrid system. You have parts of it that are relatively autonomous, that sort of capitalism, crony capitalism, but they still realize they can't generate the capital by their strict doctrinaire Marxism won't do it. They have to go out and to compromise and borrow our system. They don't care. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
They were smart enough to convince us to buy their stuff to support.
oh yeah,
That's true.
we were stupid enough to buy it.
Well, the thing is, now the Japanese, they're good at innovating, and so we would buy their Japanese products. But the Chinese are good at stealing. They still are. In fact, I think they were aided and abetted by perhaps some of our past presidents to steal our technology. There was a recent thing that made news and made Nvidia's stock drop by like almost $1 billion, or maybe it's more than that. And maybe it's more than that because they're worth. I think they're worth $1 trillion, maybe. So it might have been Nvidia, the video card company. They're the ones that they really push AI. That's what most AI uses their video cards, their card technology in order to work. And so that's why we banned the export of Nvidia cards specifically to China. Well, there was this big, bombshell, this new AI DeepSeek that had been introduced, right? Well, I was kind of, I didn't really buy that myself. I was very much skeptical of the claims because it's very easy for them just to steal our ideas and technology. And there's really, I mean, I think basically what they did was they stole, and I think that's coming out now. They stole our technology and they have just basically repackaged it. They put it in a different box, put a different brand name on it. And they're claiming that, it only cost a few $1 million to do this while we're pumping hundreds of billions of dollars into it. And that was why the stock dropped. It's like, oh no, we don't need NVIDIA cards anymore because these people say they didn't use NVIDIA cards. They didn't use this high technology. But that's a lie because there are videos of Chinese people on the dock unboxing hundreds and hundreds of, so-called banned technology. It gets there. They get it. Anyway, so yeah, you're right. So it's just by cheating and not being completely communist that they're able to do this, or by stealing ideas and supplementing their communism with a little bit of capitalism. So he says, when we list the statistics of those killed, we too can be hardened. They're just numbers. You remember, one's a tragedy, millions a statistic. But these are real people that the communists killed and maimed. I'm thinking about a boy, 10 or 11 years old, who was guilty of stealing a potato. A potato, because he and his family were starving. He was caught, and what did the communists do to him? And this is sad, and I hate even saying this stuff, but so what did they do to him? They broke his right leg below the knee. They broke his left leg below the knee. Then they broke both his legs above the knees, and finally they broke both of his hips. And then they left him alone to heal. The problem was that the boy's legs didn't heal straight. They healed outward like a crab's, with his pelvis a few inches from the floor and his face turned always to the ground. He was sent to Siberia, to the hard labor camps of the Gulag, but he couldn't work because he couldn't stand. They'd throw him a little piece of garbage now and then. He could only walk sideways like a crab. He was about 14 then, and it didn't bother him that he was helpless, defenseless, and a child. You can treat someone like this only when you view human life as worthless, as the mere product of time and chance. Thus, when the restraining influence of Christianity is removed from a country or culture, unmitigated disaster will naturally follow. And this has been a repeated pattern of the last century. And I hate even using those examples because now, you'll think about it and you'll be sad. But
Well, we're tough enough to face reality. We need to know these things.
I think, and sometimes I think about it, but I don't like to think about it too long, about God and what he sees. And he sees this, and he sees all the other things that we don't know about, all the little children that are taken advantage of, that are just murdered mercilessly, that are starved to death, that just they die crying in pain, crying in hunger. And you think, I understand now why there's a hell. I understand why God can send people to that place, to hell.
Justice demands it, doesn't it?
It does. Justice absolutely demands that God do that. So, anyway, just something I think about. Imagine being in that position. God, just omnipotent, omniscient, knowing everything, and cannot intervene because that's not it's up to us. That he has tasked us with righting as much wrong in this world as possible. And so, it'd be great if anybody that was in pain, would just miraculously be have that pain relieved and et cetera, et cetera. But we live in this world and we are the physical hands and feet of God. And if we don't do it, then who is going to do it? I mean, I hate to put it in those kind of a stark terms, but I mean, I think it is kind of sobering to think about that. And it's just because God is a just God. I mean, God cannot just take away our free will. He's got to let that monster that is torturing that person, that little child, he's got to let that happen, or the whole thing is just pointless. That little child is going to go straight to heaven. So there's that, if you want to console yourself with that. But, there are so many others that, well, anyway, I just, for what it's worth, that's something I don't like to think about that, but,
Could
later.
you look up quickly in Ecclesiastes, it may be chapter 3,
Sure.
where it says, I turned and I saw all the oppression that was done under the sun. And if you can read that without tears, I would admire you in a context like what you just described. I think that was the reference.
I'm just going to look up the word oppression and let's see. Let's see. The two verses that have the word oppression in them, 5 and 8. If you see a province in the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice, do not be amazed. Does that sound right?
No.
Or surely oppression drives the wise to madness. Oppressed. Okay. Let's look up just oppress. How about that? And this is in Ecclesiastes. Gotta scroll down that. There's a lot of that word here. Would that be the King James Version?
Yeah.
That would be in, because I may have to make sure I'm in the right book. And I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun. Does that sound right? Okay. This is chapter 4. Oh, I got the ESV going. Again, I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors there was power, and there was no one to comfort them. And I thought the dead who are already dead more fortunate than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been and has not seen the evil deeds that are done under the sun. Then I saw that all toil and all skill in work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. The fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh.
Pretty sad words, aren't they?
Yeah. Ecclesiastes is very sobering.
Of course, that was a phenomenon even thousands of years ago. Powerful people hurting the weak.
Mm-hmm. That's always gone on. It's always gone on. And the sad part is there are far more cases of that oppression and man's inhumanity to man throughout history than we know of. I mean, there are a lot of documented cases. We know, there are all kinds of documentaries about terrible serial killers and that sort of thing. That's just a small fraction of the inhumanity that has gone on throughout time. And again, imagine just having to endure that. I mean, that's along the lines of Jesus having to endure the pain and suffering of the cross. But that was, at least there was a fixed period of time there. I mean, this is just from beginning of time to the end of time. All of that. God knows all of it and experiences all of it all the time. He, again, timeless. He sees across time, forward and back. The God of the Old Testament, people like to say, oh, he's just, really harsh. And I'm like, well, he's still harsh, it's just tempered with, Jesus and, viewing us through that lens of Jesus' blood. But that's still there, that all of that is there. And it's just got to absolutely, any sin has got to absolutely just enrage and antagonize God. Just because of the fact that it's all connected. I mean, there's no sin that's worse than any other, right? I mean, I think we understand that. There might be degrees of stripes in hell, but you're still in hell. But I can understand, and I can see, and I can completely, side with the Bible and its, very clear depiction and description of hell, the definition of hell. And in fact, it needs to be there, as you say. The justice demands that it be there, especially when we're in this section. This just it makes me think about that, and it's the kind of stuff that I'm trying to go to sleep, and the thought like that will come through my head, and it's like, okay, now I'm going to be up for a while. The refutation of a common myth. Now, it took me a while to get this one right. Now, this is another AI. Said, I want you to show me death holding a scythe, but, it needs to have the communist hammer and sickle off to the side. So,
That's pretty cool. You want to copyright that?
yeah, I thought that was pretty good. Thought it took me a while. That's pretty effective. And yet, we sometimes hear the statement that, quote, more people have been killed in the name of Christ than in any other name. We hear it so often that some people take it as truth. It's like Hitler's big lie. If you tell a big lie often enough and loudly enough, sooner or later, many people will take it for the truth. But what are the facts? Indeed, have more people been killed in the name of Christ than in any other? No! Far more have been killed in the name of atheism than in the name of Christianity. For example, far more have been killed by Marxists or communists than were ever killed by professing Christians. The numbers killed by atheists completely dwarf the number of those killed by professing Christians. Part of the point of those who make the obnoxious statement that more have been killed in the name of Christ is that included in the deceased are all Christian martyrs. But even with that inclusion taken into consideration, it's still a gross distortion of history. To disprove this myth, we don't have to bother going any farther than the last century, or I guess the century before the last century. We're in the next century, because it saw the worst atrocities ever committed. After all, it wasn't until the 20th century that the term genocide was coined.
Could you send that to me as a JPEG or a PNG file or something?
Yeah, I'll try to remember
If
that.
you don't mind.
Sure,
I have
sure.
your permission to use it.
Oh, of course, it's AI, man. Everybody contributed to that one. The whole knowledge of the humanity. So Stalin slaughtered more than 40 million people. As horrible and inexcusable as the Inquisition was, it was rather like a tea party when compared with the purges of Stalin. The entire Inquisition is reported to have killed 30,000. 30,000. Again, not just a statistic, it's sad, but still, 30,000. And it treated death as the last resort, trying to get the alleged heretic to recant. In contrast, the purges of Stalin showed no mercy, no chance of repentance. It is generally agreed that the number of people Stalin killed was 40 million. 40 million. Someone once tried to blame the church for Stalin, since at one point he studied in a seminary in Tiflis. However, this was essentially the only avenue of higher education open to him. The school was a hotbed of anti-government subversion. It produced virtually as many radicals as it did priests. Stalin persecuted the church, sometimes ruthlessly. Dr. Barrett says that in 1934, Stalin, quote, widely regarded the Antichrist attempted liquidation of the entire Christian church. He was regarded as the Antichrist and attempted the liquidation of the entire Christian church. Hitler, who hated God as much as Stalin did, had learned well from their mentor, Lenin, the father of the modern totalitarian state. Hitler was a total racist who wanted to remove from the world those he viewed as human bacillus, I guess, going back to the kind of that idea of the fungus, right? He killed Jews, gypsies, most of whom were professing Christians, Slavs, Poles, and others deemed racially inferior. The Nazis worked out a system where Jews and others were to be worked until they were no longer able to work, then they were to be exterminated. The Nazis didn't even want to waste money on bullets in killing the Jews and others in the concentration camps, so poison gas was used to exterminate many at once. Even the gas was sometimes used in lesser amounts to economize, so at times the victims were still alive when the gas ovens were opened. The first victims of the Holocaust were 70,000 insane and incurable people. The only courageous public voice against this came from two Christian leaders. Thus, the Holocaust actually began with euthanasia. By the end, 6 million Jews and 9 to 10 million others, mostly Christians, were liquidated. No one knows for sure the exact number of Gentiles killed. I mean, add all those numbers up. I mean, tens and tens of millions of people, bordering on 100 million. Hitler's bloody record. That was what we just talked about, actually. So that was Hitler. Sorry. So Hitler has slain his millions, Mao his tens of millions. It's estimated that Mao Zedong alone killed more than 70 million Chinese. So now we're definitely over 100 million. In the first 10 years after Mao's takeover in 1948, 24.7 million were killed in purges, famines, deaths in slave labor camps. From 1959 to 1962, about 25 million were killed or starved to death in the collectivization effort and its failure. And then finally, from 69 to 76, in the, quote, Great Proletariat Cultural Revolution of China, an estimated 22 million were killed. Dr. Barrett calls this history's most systematic attempt ever by a single nation to eradicate and destroy Christianity and religion. In this, it failed. That's, on the positive side, it was the biggest attempt ever, and it failed. Thus, Mao was responsible for killing about 72 million human beings. It's estimated that the communist takeover of Cambodia, a nation of 7 million, resulted in the deaths of 2 or 3 million innocent people. This was due to the political elimination of possible opponents and the insane attempt to create a consistent Marxist agrarian economy in which everyone was forced to leave the cities and work in the fields. The communists were not concerned about the number of dead, but about the creation of an ideal state. Such acts of complete devotion to the doctrines and cause of communism, regardless of the cost in human suffering and lives, is common in communist history. There's really no way to count all the number of people slaughtered in other communist revolutions and communist-sponsored wars. The ground is screaming with the spilled blood of untold millions in Korea, Vietnam, Laos, Thailand, Cuba, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Angola, Mozambique, Ethiopia, Afghanistan, the Philippines, and numerous other nations around the world. Adding up the numbers, it's an amazing chart. It's just staggering. Now let's add up these figures. Mao killed about 72 million. When we add the 40 million Stalin is responsible for, we come to 112 million. Throw in Hitler's 15 million, not counting the devastating war he started, and we come to about 127 million. Add other killings by other atheistic and totalitarian states as a result of their atheistic ideology, you come up with a number of more than 130 million. If we were to add those dead from the wars of the 20th century, the number would easily jump to 170 million, But in order to compare apples with apples, we'll stick with the 130 million figure. Using the most exaggerated criteria and numbers, one could come up with no more than 17 million people killed by professing Christians in the name of Christ in 20 centuries of Christian history. So when compared to the top estimate of 17 million allegedly killed in the name of Christ, we see a huge difference with the estimated 130 million killed by atheists. Thus, the number of those killed in the name of the secular state in the 20th century alone is about 8 times more than our estimate of the number of those killed in the name of Christ in all centuries of the Christian era. An interesting point about our comparison is that we've only been talking about those born. The unborn aren't even taken into consideration. It's no secret the church has always been opposed to abortion. There are millions alive today who would have been aborted if it were not for the Christian stance on this issue. Worldwide, the present number of abortions is estimated to be a staggering 65 million per year. That was 30 years ago now. This means that approximately 1 billion people, have been killed by abortion alone within just the last 20 years of this writing of this book. So think about how many since then, subsequently. Talk about genocide. Thus, if we add up the aborted unborn to the total picture of the number of those killed by professing Christian perpetrators in the name of Christ, would appear microscopic compared to those killed by the ideas and practices of atheism. So the next time someone tries to say that old lie that more people have been killed in the name of Christ, correct them with the facts. As Paul Johnson, the great historian, says, the 20th century state has proved itself the great killer of all times. The columnist Joseph Sobran writes about the secularist who repeatedly looks to the crimes of the past committed in the name of religion, ignoring the crimes committed in the last century in the name of irreligion. So here's this extended quote. They will keep their eyes fixed in horror on wrongs committed centuries ago because, as a friend of mine puts it, they haven't noticed the 20th century. But that century was one of mass murder, genocide, institutionalized terrorism, the fruits of that phantom faith in the secular state that persists in promising liberation even as it attacks the most fundamental human attachments. And it makes me think about, Jesus' statement, about you're pointing out the speck in your brother's eye and you have a beam in your own. I mean, when somebody is talking about, supposedly the crimes of Christianity, it pales in comparison to the crimes of everyone else that is not a Christian, atheists. All right, so here we go. In conclusion, we made it. More than a century ago, James Russell Lowell, the great literary man who was Minister of State for the U.S. to England, was once at a banquet where the Christian religion, the mission enterprise in particular, was being attacked by scoffers. He spoke up and said, I challenge any skeptic to find a 10 square mile spot on this planet where they can live their lives in peace and safety and decency, where womanhood is honored, where infancy and old age are revered, where they can educate their children, where the gospel of Christ has not gone first to prepare the way. If they find such a place, then I would encourage them to immigrate thither and there proclaim their unbelief. And that's what we tell them all the time, It's like these idiotic, gays for Palestine. It's like, seriously? Yeah, okay. For real? So yeah, and this is a great point, and think about the imagery he uses here. They can live their lives in peace, safety and decency, womanhood's honored, infancy and old age revered, educate their children, where the gospel of Christ has not gone first to prepare the way. It creates the atmosphere where these things can flourish. That's a really good point. So there we are.
The idyllic Native American, how that's portrayed today, their lifestyle, it was pastoral and wonderful. They were just nomads wandering the Great Plains, and everything was hunky dory. But the reality is they were savages until Christianity came to many of them and taught them the truth. But they didn't respect womanhood or revere infancy or old age or any of those things.
Oh no. I mean, these communist nations, they don't either. They don't. They're not.
There's no reason to, no motivation.
No, there's no. There's really now. They still are very patriarchal. They're very much male centric, but that's because of the force aspect of communism. That's how they enforce their beliefs is through force. And so yeah, just what is it? Survival of the strongest, not that, but what is it? Might makes right. Um, anyway, Christianity really is it's the unsung hero of civilization. It's the thing that most people don't even think about. It's like the water. I use this analogy all the time. It's like the water that the fish doesn't realize he's swimming in because it surrounds him and it permeates every aspect of his life.
When we set forth an apologetic or a defense of Christianity based on these historical facts, I'm sure we'll have to anticipate an objection, and that is, well, it's religion in general that ameliorates society. It's not necessarily the Christian faith. So Hinduism could have accomplished the same, or Islam.
Does Islam?
How would you answer that? Because it sounds to me like there's a pretty good answer.
Does Islam? I mean, this is a pretty violent part of the world. They also believe that it's perfectly legitimate to lie, as do some Christian denominations, to get your way. There is not peace in some of those lands.
What about Hinduism?
Yeah. What about it? These are the people that still they've imported this idea of the widow jumping on top of the funeral pyre, sati. I mean that's like making a comeback. How is that not violence against women? Of course it was. We killed their leaders and converted them to Christianity. So it's, and I guess it's just this implicit. Well, we have such a wonderful life as Christians. Why would anyone gainsay that? It's kind of like these these Congress people out here protesting. Elon Musk finding all this waste and deceit in our treasury, in the spending of our funds. So you're saying that you want it to continue? Well, of course they want it to continue. They're in on the grift. But again, when you go to a foreign land and you see people living in mud huts, are you not compelled to teach them how to build a house properly? Are you not compelled to help them dig wells and get irrigation systems going? I mean, isn't that what the Christian ethos is? It's not only is it teaching people spiritually to be better, but it's trying to improve their life. We want to treat other people like we want to be treated ourselves. Would you want for someone to come in, some rich person with the means to affect a positive change in your life and to withhold that information because, well, we don't want to bother your culture. We don't want to upset your belief system by introducing these things. It's just silly, downright silly.
I think it's the fatalism of Hindu philosophy itself that creates I know it created the caste system because they believe in karma and reincarnation. So whatever your lot in life, however low it is, you deserve it. You're supposed to be there. Mm-hmm. It's not like we look at the world around us and say it could be better. It ought to be better, but they don't view it that way. It's just everything has its place. Mm-hmm. Whatever is right. Whatever is right. The is the ought.
Yeah.
There is no ought, really.
And the other thing you don't see is, okay, yeah, there are a lot of Indians that come here. There was that debate not too long ago about the H-1B visa people. And, of course, some of the retort was, well, yeah, there are some places in India that are pretty high tech, but I mean, most of that nation is very poor and they don't have access to this kind of stuff. So, are you just seeing a disproportionate representation of the most intelligent, the brightest, the most overachieving people on the media because that's what they want us to see? China's pretty prosperous, at least, monetarily. They, sell a lot of their junk to us and make money. But look at the people. I mean, a lot of them are starving. They're treated horribly. They're just slaves. So, is that really the kind of society you want? Is that a successful society? No. I would say that even our society is not 100% successful. I mean, we have prosperity. We have people not starving, but rather, being obese and, sitting on their chair all day long, playing video games, and then we subsidize that. But is that really the basis for a healthy society, for a good, highly functioning society? And I would say no. But again, that's because people just don't have a proper work ethic. And that's the Christian ethic. That's what we bring to the table. Christians believe that we're working as if we're working for the Lord. And so you shouldn't have to have somebody stand over your shoulder, tapping you, hey, do this, get this done, because we know that the Lord is watching us and we are working. And we know that regardless of who's watching, we ought to do the right thing. And that is just not true in a lot of these other nations where they're trying their best to skirt the law. Of course, we have that too in government, and that's what we're trying to get rid of, is all this waste, corruption. But that's what a communist or socialist, I mean, that's pretty much what they are, Washington. I mean, they're living off of the wealth of the people that produce it, right? So you have people that have given to the people that have not. Well, they don't necessarily deserve it. They could work, they could get a job, and hopefully they will be getting a job pretty soon, not working for the government anymore. But again, there's a lot more that goes into it, I think, than just the obvious things like with Islam and its violence inherently. There are a lot of things that go into a healthy society, and as you say, I don't think that Hinduism is necessarily a healthy outlook on life. It's not a healthy to the individual spiritually. Of course, nothing's going to be spiritually fulfilling except for the religion that God has given to us in the Bible. Yes, sir.
Man becomes of the opinion that he knows more than God did, then you have people like the Chinese who starved their own people to death because they knew how to do it. And they got them out there and they had them doing all this idiotic farming and going out in the cities and leaving the industry to collapse and ended up with starvation and no telling how many in Russia and China and other places
Mm-hmm.
fell for it or were unable to defend themselves against it and were slaughtered
Mm-hmm.
by people who were atheists and thought they knew or thought themselves as God, maybe.
Mm-hmm. And two, again, to Philip's point, there's so many people, zealots, that they are so indoctrinated and so concerned with the idea of the state and this, nebulous group of people, this society of people, that individuals don't count, and so they're expendable, and we don't care what happens to them. And I think too of the fact that the United States is set up so similarly to the church in the way that there are individual states, right? So the individual states all have their own. They all conduct their business, right, in the way that they. Well, yeah. And so, but the thing is, if you have one state that goes bad, well, it doesn't necessarily, taint the rest of them, right? So I think that is unique, in the United States. They've tried to emulate that over there in the UK with the European Union, but it's completely backwards. It's for the wrong reasons they've tried to emulate it. We've done this because the power was supposed to always be in the states. The European Union says no, all the power should be, concentrated in the federal or the super state. Whereas over here, it's always the power of the people. It's from the ground up, right? And and there they're trying to make it top down. And so, in that way, I think that's one of the reasons we've been so successful. And again, it's the power of the individual. It's the value placed on the individual, and not just what that individual can produce. I mean, we're all proud of, when somebody can produce or be inventive or whatever, but it's in the intrinsic value, right? Our Creator has endowed us, every single one of us, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And think about that, the pursuit of happiness. Like, would you imagine that some Chinese person would even fathom that concept? They've never known it.
They did in 1989, and they were slaughtered for even mentioning it in public in Tiananmen Square.
Yeah, that's true. Anybody that would dare
Goddess
even.
of Liberty statue they had just breaks your heart to think of how they were so close, but nothing came of it.
Yeah. So, well, let me